My son held the pocket watch up to the dining room light, turning it slowly between his fingers the way someone does when they're assessing something, rather than admiring it, and said, "Mom, this is just sitting on your nightstand collecting dust. I should take it, get it serviced, find a proper display case. Somewhere it'll actually be safe." Everyone kept eating. My daughter-in-law Suzanne reached for the bread basket. My neighbor Fran, who I'd invited at the last minute because I hated the idea of another quiet Sunday dinner, smiled politely and looked down at her plate. I looked at my son Vincent. He set the watch down gently on the tablecloth, like he was doing me a favor, and added, "Dad would have wanted it taken care of properly." I said nothing. I just reached out and took it back. The watch had been my husband Clifford's. Not an antique in any formal sense. It had been his father's before it was his, a plain gold-cased pocket watch with a small dent on the back from something that had happened before I ever knew either of them. Clifford wore it in his shirt pocket every Sunday. He didn't own a vest, but he carried it there anyway. And by evening the shape of it would leave a faint, oval impression in the fabric. I used to tease him about that. He had been gone 14 months. I said I'd hold on to it, the way I always said I'd hold on to things when Vincent started in on them. He gave me that look. Patient, slightly pained, the one that said he thought I was being unreasonable but was too polished to say so directly. Suzanne refilled her own wine glass and didn't look at either of us. That night, after they left, I sat at the kitchen table with the watch in my hand. I hadn't turned the lights on. The street lamp outside came through the window at a low angle, and I sat there in the half-dark the way I'd been doing most evenings since Clifford passed. I turned the watch over. The dent on the back. The small hinge on the case lid that I'd clicked open 100 times over the years because I liked the sound of it. I clicked it open again, and that was when I saw it. Tucked into the inner rim of the case, pressed so flat against the edge of the glass face that I had never noticed it in all the years I'd held that watch, in all the 14 months since Clifford died. A strip of paper, folded so many times it was barely thicker than a thread. My hands were not steady when I pulled it free. His handwriting, I'd know it in the dark. 2 lines, an address in Richmond, Virginia. Below that, a name, Odom and Purcell, estate attorneys. And below that, a single word. Estelle. Just my name, nothing else. I sat with it for a long time. Clifford had been to Richmond twice, in the last 2 years of his life. He told me it was business, a consulting arrangement, with an old colleague from his career in civil engineering. I hadn't pressed him. After 41 years of marriage, you learn which questions your husband will answer fully, and which ones he'll wave aside with, "Nothing interesting, just paperwork." I had let it go both times. Now I understood. There was no consulting arrangement. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I lay on my side of the bed. I still sleep on my side. I haven't once crossed to his. And I stared at the ceiling, with the strip of paper folded back up in my palm. And I thought about Vincent reaching across my dining room table to take the watch. Get it serviced. Keep it somewhere safe. He hadn't said that because he cared about the watch. I thought about the past year. The way he'd started coming around more often after Clifford died, how he offered to handle the accounts, the paperwork, the insurance filings. "You shouldn't have to deal with all of this alone, Mom," he'd said. I believed him. He was my son. I signed what he put in front of me because I trusted him the way you trust the people you raised. I stopped trusting him somewhere around 3 in the morning, lying in the dark with my husband's handwriting folded in my hand. By 7 the next morning, I was already packed. I told no one where I was going. Not Vincent, not Fran, not my sister down in Tallahassee, who calls every Sunday. The drive from our house in Greensboro to Richmond is just under 3 hours. I made it in 2.5 because I needed to get there before I talked myself out of it. The law office of Odom and Purcell was on a quiet side street west of the Fan District, not a big firm. A converted row house, painted slate gray, brass plaques beside the door. I parked a block away and sat in the car for a few minutes with the heat running, watching a man walk his dog past the window. watching the ordinary Tuesday morning continue around me, as though nothing in the world had shifted. Then I went in. The woman at the front desk looked up. I gave her my name. I said my husband had directed me here. She nodded in a way that suggested this was not a surprise, a quiet, composed nod, and asked me to wait just a moment. The attorney's name was Craig Purcell. He came out to meet me personally, which I took as a sign that he knew exactly who I was. He was the kind of man who chose his words carefully and shook hands with both of his, and when I showed him the strip of paper from inside the watch case, he nodded again in that same composed way. "Mrs. Greer," he said, "your husband asked me to expect you eventually. He hoped it would be sooner rather than later." He led me to a private conference room, paneled walls, a long wooden table, afternoon light through a window that looked out over a small courtyard. He closed the door. He told me that Clifford had come to him 18 months before he died, not to update the regular will that had been handled by a different attorney years earlier, but to establish something separate. A revocable living trust, assets restructured, specific protections written in, specific access granted to me alone. I asked him why Clifford hadn't told me himself. Craig Purcell paused. He folded his hands on the table. "He was still gathering information," he said carefully. "He wanted to make sure you were protected before he said anything that might prompt someone else to act first." "Someone else?" "He found something," I said. It wasn't a question. Craig Purcell reached into a file folder and placed a sealed envelope on the table in front of me. "He left this for you," he said, "along with some other documents. I think it's better you read it before we go through the rest." I looked at the envelope. My name on the front, in Clifford's handwriting. That slight leftward slant I'd known for 4 decades. I had received maybe 6 real letters from him in our entire marriage. He was not a letter-writing man, and seeing my name in that handwriting on a sealed envelope in a law office in Richmond made something in my chest pull so tight. I had to press my hand flat on the table. I opened it. "Estelle, if you're reading this, then you found the watch. I knew you would. You were always more observant than you gave yourself credit for. I need you to know that I tried to be certain before I put any of this in writing. I didn't want to be wrong. I didn't want to bring this to you and then find out I had misread something, made an error somewhere. So I took my time. I checked everything twice. About 18 months ago, I noticed a discrepancy in the savings account I kept separate from our joint accounts. The one set aside for emergencies, that you knew about but rarely looked at closely. I assumed at first it was a bank error. Then, I looked more carefully. $12,000 had been moved in 3 transfers over 4 months. The authorization on each transfer carried your name. But you didn't make those transfers, Estelle. I know you didn't, because I know your handwriting, and I know how you handle money. And neither one matched what I was looking at. I started looking at other things. The cabin. I stopped reading. The cabin was a 40-year-old A-frame in the Blue Ridge Mountains outside Boone, North Carolina. Clifford and I had bought it young, when we couldn't really afford it, on the kind of optimism you only have in your 30s. We'd spent every summer there, every fall. The porch looked out over a ridgeline that turned red and orange in October, in a way I have never seen duplicated anywhere in this world. I forced myself to keep reading. The cabin was sold 8 months ago. I didn't find out until I searched the county deed records. The sale went through a power of attorney I had never seen before. A document bearing what appears to be your signature, notarized, dated 3 years ago. I've had the signature reviewed. It isn't yours. The proceeds of that sale, $127,400, were deposited into an account I couldn't trace from our records. Vincent handled the transaction. Suzanne was copied on the paperwork. I set the letter down. I picked it up again. I'm not telling you this because I want you to do anything specific. I'm telling you because you have the right to know, and because I love you, and because I should have said something sooner. I kept thinking I'd have more time to handle it myself. I should have known better than that. Everything you need is with Craig Purcell. The trust protects the house and what remains of the investments. The decisions about what to do next belong entirely to you. I trust your judgment, Estelle, more than anyone else's on this earth. I always have. With all the love I have, Clifford. The conference room was very quiet. I could hear the courtyard outside through the glass. A bird somewhere, and nothing else. Craig Purcell waited without speaking. After a while, I asked him to show me the rest. The documents were thorough. Clifford had always been thorough. 30 years in civil engineering will do that to a person. Bank transfer records. A printout of the deed filing from the county register. The power of attorney with the forged signature. At the bottom of the stack was a sealed USB drive. Craig told me Clifford had brought it separately, 2 weeks before he died. He said it contained correspondence, Craig said. He didn't tell me more than that. I took the drive. I took the envelope. I thanked Craig Purcell and walked back out through the slate-gray row house into the afternoon light in Richmond, and I sat in my car for a long time without starting the engine. The cabin in Boone. I used to keep a coffee mug there that I used only on that porch. It had a small chip on the rim that I'd been meaning to replace for 15 years. Someone had sold my porch. I found a hotel 6 blocks away and checked in for the night. I sat at the small desk with my laptop, and I plugged in the drive, and I made myself look at everything Clifford had left me. The folder was labeled with his name, his careful handwriting in the file name. Inside were scanned financial documents and a second folder marked correspondence. I opened the correspondence folder last. The emails were between Vincent and Suzanne, 14 months worth. Reading them was like watching a door open onto a room you had lived in for years, and suddenly seeing it from a different angle. All the familiar furniture arranged in a pattern you'd never questioned until now. It doesn't have to be much at a time. Just consistent. She never looks at that account closely. The cabin is the bigger move. We need the POA notarized. I know someone who can handle the paperwork. She signed everything I put in front of her after Dad's diagnosis. She wasn't paying attention. I don't think she even read it. I stopped on that one. Read it 3 times. I hadn't read everything he put in front of me. He was right about that. Clifford had been diagnosed the previous spring. Nothing critical at first, they thought, a cardiac issue that needed monitoring. And Vincent had come over with a stack of papers he said were just-in-case documents, medical directives, healthcare proxies, things any responsible adult child would want a parent to have in place. I signed them at the kitchen table, with the cup of coffee going cold beside me, because I was thinking about Clifford in the next room, and what the word monitoring actually meant for a man of 72. I hadn't read everything. Vincent had known I wouldn't. I closed the laptop and sat in the hotel room in the dark. By morning, something had settled in me. Not peace. I don't want to call it that. More like the stillness that comes after something breaks completely, when there's nothing left to brace for. I checked out, drove home, unpacked my bag, and then I picked up my phone and I called my son. He answered on the second ring, easy and unsuspecting. "Hey, Mom, everything okay?" "Everything's fine," I said. "I'd like to have dinner this week. You and Suzanne both. Thursday if you can." A small pause. The kind that meant he was reading something into the invitation, trying to decide if there was something to be concerned about. "Sure," he said. "What's the occasion?" "Nothing special," I said. "I just think it's time we all sat down together." He said Thursday worked. I said 7. We hung up. I spent the next 3 days doing things I should have done 14 months earlier. I called my own attorney, a woman named Beverly Ostrander, who had handled a property dispute for me years before and whom I trusted completely, and made an appointment. I went through every account, every folder in Clifford's files. I knew what I was looking for now, and I found what I needed to find. The signature on the power of attorney was not mine. Beverly said a handwriting examiner would see it in under 5 minutes. "This is forgery," she said. "The property transfer that followed it is fraudulent." She walked me through everything clearly, without dramatics, the way good attorneys do. She said, Clifford's trust insulated the house and the protected accounts. She said the decision of how to proceed belonged entirely to me. I thanked her and drove home and set the table for 3. Thursday. Vincent and Suzanne arrived at exactly 7, which was like him. She brought wine. He came in wearing that easy smile I had been proud of for so many years, that polished ease he'd carried since he was a teenager who knew how to walk into a room. "Smells good in here, Mom," he said. "Thank you," I said. "Come sit down." I had made pot roast, Clifford's recipe. I wanted that in the room. We ate. Small talk filled the spaces. A frustrating client at Vincent's firm. Whether I'd gotten enough rain on the garden this spring. The drive over. I answered everything calmly and poured water and passed the bread, and I waited. I waited until the plates were mostly cleared. Then I got up and went to the sideboard and came back with the envelope from Richmond. I set it on the table in front of me and sat down. Vincent looked at the envelope. Something shifted in his face, small, controlled. Suzanne went very still. "I went to Richmond this week," I said. "I met with an attorney your father had been working with." The room was quiet. "I found something he left for me," I continued, inside his watch. Vincent's jaw tightened. It was the first crack in the surface. I opened the envelope and laid the documents out one at a time. The transfer records, the deed filing, the forged power of attorney, each one placed carefully in sequence, the way Clifford himself would have done it. Vincent looked at the papers and looked away. "Mom," he started. "Whatever you think." "I don't think anything," I said quietly. "I know." Suzanne's hands were in her lap. She hadn't touched anything on the table. I reached into the envelope one more time and placed a single printed email between us, not the worst one. Just enough. Vincent's voice dropped. "Where did you get that?" "Your father was paying attention," I said. "He was always paying attention. You just didn't realize how much." No one spoke. Outside, a car moved slowly down the street. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. "The cabin," I said finally. "That porch was where your father proposed to me. Did you know that?" I looked at Vincent. October. The leaves were turning on that ridgeline. He wasn't a spontaneous man. He planned everything. But that morning he just did it, standing there with his coffee, looking out over the trees. I've never seen him surprise himself before or since. I paused. "You sold that porch." Something moved across his face. Not defiance. Not the calculation I'd been expecting. Something younger than that. Something that looked under everything, like shame. "We were drowning," he said. His voice had lost its polish. "My business, the last 2 years. I didn't know how to tell you how bad it had gotten. So you forged my name on a legal document." I told myself it was temporary. There it was. The word people use when they know what they're doing is wrong, but aren't ready to stop. Suzanne spoke then, for the first time all evening. Her voice was careful, and it shook slightly at the edges. "I didn't know about the signature," she said. "I knew about the cabin. I knew about the account. But I didn't know he forged anything until after it was already done." She wasn't looking at Vincent. She was looking at her own hands. I told him it wasn't right. More than once. I said it. Her voice broke just slightly. "I know that doesn't fix anything." "No," I agreed, "it doesn't." Vincent pressed his palms flat on the table. "I can pay it back. I'll find a way." "With what?" I asked. He didn't answer. Because there was no answer. I placed the final document on the table. The trust summary. Beverly's annotations in the margins, precise and unmistakable. "Your father spent the last year of his life quietly building something that would protect me," I said. "The house. The investment accounts he managed separately. All of it is held in a trust that I alone can authorize. Your name isn't on it. Suzanne's name isn't on it. Your access to any account connected to me is revoked. Effective immediately." "You can't just," Vincent started. "I can," I said, and I meant it all the way down. He fell silent. "I'm not doing this to hurt you," I said. "Even now, I meant that too. I'm doing this because what you did was wrong, not complicated, not forgivable because circumstances were hard, wrong." I looked at my son across the table where he had eaten 1,000 meals. "And because your father trusted me to honor what he built." I'm going to do that. Vincent looked at his hands for a long moment, then he nodded, once. Small. It was the most honest thing he had done all evening. We talked for another hour. Not warmly. That was gone for now, maybe for a long time. But honestly, I laid out the terms Beverly had prepared, the repayment structure, the legal exposure he was facing if I chose to pursue it further. I told him I hadn't decided yet. I told him he would have to live with not knowing for a while. He asked me not to go to law enforcement. I told him I was still deciding. I meant it. When they stood to leave, Vincent walked out first. Suzanne paused by the door and turned back. Her face was different than it had been at the table. Stripped of the composure she usually wore in this house. Older somehow, like something had finally set down. I'm so sorry, Estelle, she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I know that. I know sorry doesn't. She stopped. Started again. I'm not sure I know who he is right now. I'm not sure I have for a while. I looked at her. Then, maybe this is the part where you figure that out, I said. She nodded, eyes wet, and left. I stood in my entryway and listened to their car back out of the driveway. Then I went back to the dining room and sat down at the table with Clifford's pot roast, gone cold in the serving dish, and I let myself feel everything. The grief, the anger, the exhaustion, and underneath all of it, the strange clean thing I could only call clarity. Because secrets end when they're spoken aloud, and whatever came next, nothing was hidden anymore. The months that followed were not easy, but they were honest. Beverly filed the necessary paperwork. The forged power of attorney was officially invalidated. The county recorded the correction to the deed transfer, though the cabin itself was gone. The new owners had already moved in and repainted the exterior, and there was nothing to be done about the structure. What could be recovered in civil damages was a separate and ongoing conversation. Vincent and I did not speak for 2 months. The silence where a son used to be was louder some mornings than anything else in the house. But something else was happening in the meantime. Suzanne called me on a Tuesday morning 6 weeks after that dinner. Not to explain or to ask for anything. She called to tell me she had moved out of their house and was staying with her sister in Raleigh. She wanted me to know because she thought I deserved to, and because she had spent 6 weeks thinking about what I'd said at the door. We had coffee together in March. 2 hours at a small place near her sister's neighborhood, and we talked about things that had nothing to do with Vincent. Her work, my garden, a novel she was reading. Near the end, she looked at me across the table and said, I should have stopped him sooner. I'll carry that. Yes, I said, you should have. She nodded. But you told the truth when it mattered, I said. That's not nothing. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was something that needed its own time to grow into whatever it was going to become. Vincent called in the spring. His voice was quieter than I was used to. Less managed, less smooth. He said he wanted to talk. Not to negotiate anything, just to talk. I said I would think about it. I spent several days actually thinking about it. Then I said yes. We met at a park near where he grew up, the one with the creek path he used to ride his bike along when he was small. We walked for an hour and said hard things and left most of them unresolved, because some things don't come right in a single afternoon. But at one point, he stopped beside the water and looked at me and said, I don't know how Dad knew. I thought I'd been careful. He was always paying attention, I said again. You just never understood how much. He was quiet for a long time after that. On the drive home, I stopped at a red light and sat with both hands on the wheel, and I could see Clifford so clearly, sitting in that conference room in Richmond across from Craig Purcell, building the thing that would protect me. Methodical, thorough, hating that it was necessary, hating that it was his son, but building it anyway. Because that's what love looks like when it has to. I got home and went to my nightstand and picked up the watch. I held it for a moment, the weight of it, the dent on the back, the small hinge I'd clicked open 1,000 times. I clicked it open once more. The inside of the case was empty now. Clean, nothing hidden anymore. But it didn't feel empty. It felt like exactly what it was. something he had placed in my hands on purpose, something he had trusted me to find at precisely the moment I needed to find it. I closed the case. I kept it.